What is the Kyoto Protocol? The Kyoto Protocol is a treaty created by the United Nations in 1997 that aimed to reduce carbon emissions worldwide, thereby combating global warming or climate change. The name Kyoto was derived from the city in Japan where the protocol was adopted.
Kyoto Protocol was an extension of the UN's 1992 Framework Convention on Climate Change, also known as the UNFCCC. The convention initially committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It was based on the UN's belief that there was a consensus among the scientific community that global warming is a real phenomenon and is primarily caused by carbon emissions made by human activities. What does the protocol cover? The Kyoto Protocol applies to the following 6 greenhouse gases, which are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, perfluorocarbons, hydrofluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. Although the protocol was adopted in 1997, it did not go into effect until 2005. In 2012, the Kyoto Protocol was extended with the adoption of the Doha Amendment.
The protocol focused on the demands that 37 developed nations work to reduce their emissions reduction on developed nations, viewing they are largely responsible for carbon emissions. Developing nations were only asked to comply voluntarily. The protocol's approach in such regards was defined in the treaty as the principle of common but different responsibility and respective capabilities. It includes establishing a carbon credit system whereby nations can earn credit by participating in emission reduction projects in other nations.
Problems with the protocol. The fact about carbon emission, however, appear to show that the UN's reasoning to flat. For example, least developed nations which are likely to be more reliant on coal as an energy source and less likely to impose restrictive environmental laws. In fact, account of much of the worldwide total of carbon emissions. China and India together account of approximately 35% of total carbon emission. As of 2020, while the developed nations of the UK, France, and Germany combined only account for 4% of the worldwide carbon emission. Yet, China and India were both exempted from the treaty's requirements, which only apply to 37 developed nations. Critics of Kyoto Protocols argue that it is extremely easy for 155 signatory nations out of 192 to vote in the favor of it when they are exempted from all of its requirements.
How will the Kyoto Protocol affect developing countries? The protocol does provide a complicated mechanism that would allow developed countries to earn credits for reducing the rate of emission growth in developing countries. However, it would have little effects overall because developing countries are expressly exempted from Kyoto's emissions targets.
The current state of the Kyoto Protocol. The Doha Amendment in 2015 extended the protocol to 2020. However, it became a moot point shortly thereafter when the Paris Climate Accord was signed by most of the regional ratifiers of the Kyoto Protocol. The US initially signed the Paris Climate Accord but later withdrew from the agreement. Like the Kyoto Protocol that preceded it, the Paris Climate Accord was also subjected to much criticism. For example, the accord is criticized for only requiring that a country submit a statement that it intends to work on reducing carbon emissions at some point in the future for it to be considered as fulfilling the requirements of the agreement. In contrast, it doesn't require countries to actually do anything to reduce emissions right now.
An example of how the agreement structure falls short can be seen by looking at the nation of Brazil. it submitted a statement that it intends to start working on reducing carbon emissions by only 2%, starting in the 2040. That do-nothing statement is all that's required to certify Brazil as being a signatory in good standing of the Paris Climate Accord. Even if every signatory country met its stated carbon emissions reductions targets, it would only put a small dent in the total amount of carbon emissions worldwide. John Kerry, the former U.S. Secretary of State, stated that even if the U.S. eliminated all its carbon emissions, that still wouldn't be enough to offset the carbon pollution coming from the rest of the world.